Okay, and we're here sitting live with the wonderful Rotarian Tom Hodgson. Welcome, sir.
Well, thank you for coming.
No, and thank you for
Pardon.
having me. This is an honor.
Very interesting experiment with me.
Yeah, let's see what happens.
I have a bit of a throat, so may clear it once in a while.
That's okay, and throat is what we need to speak, so that's okay. So I want to get right into things. The reason I wanted to do this is I read the book that you recently put out, and I really enjoyed it. And I don't want to get too much into the content of the book because I don't want to spoil it for people who want to read it. But one thing I wanted to ask you, which I found very interesting. First off, I want to ask you why you wrote the book. But secondly, I noticed that when reading the book, it was chock full of quotes, chock full of pictures, and you did a lot of sort of background work. So you gave a lot of history, that you've been through. And in some situations, you also gave a lot of history of the history. And I thought it was really nice because usually and once again, your book is an autobiography. Usually when you read an autobiography, it's fully text. There's maybe a couple of photos, that are showcased.
That's true.
But here it almost was, for lack of a better word, like a scrapbook, but a very detailed scrapbook.
Yeah.
When you read it, every sentence you sort of reflect and you think. So what I wanted to know is, did you do that on purpose? Is that your writing style, or is that something that just came about organically? So if maybe first you can start by why you wrote the book, and then maybe comment on your writing style.
Right. Well, I've come from a family in Halliburton County, and they go back, both on my mother's side and my dad's side, they go back to original settlers. And there were only about 5 buildings in Halliburton when they came. And that was 1865. So we had quite a history in that county. And then my father got involved in politics and his older brother. And then I had 2 brothers that were elected to the Ontario legislature. And I had a nephew who became a cabinet minister in the Ontario government. So I thought, there's a lot of history here. How the people were pioneers and how they had to clear the forests and make farms.
Yeah.
And it was difficult to farm up there because there's a lot of bush and rock and stuff. And then 3 of my brothers have passed away. And I thought, I'm the last male. I have 2 sisters, but they weren't interested in writing anything about the history. But I was a history teacher, so it was a natural fit.
Oh, okay.
And I thought, if I don't do this, then a lot of this history is going to be lost.
Correct.
And that's really why I did that book. It took me 2 years to do it.
2 years, wow.
Mm-hmm. What was the second question?
So the second question is your writing style. So, once again, the writing style I found to be very unique because it was very entertaining. It made for light reading, but the reflections were great. Each sentence that you had, you were thinking about different things, such as how you came from the Viking traditions. Then you spoke off the Viking traditions. You had some pictures, things like that.
Yes.
So did you want to organize it that way, or did it just come about that way? Because it's very unique.
Well, it's interesting that you have cottoned onto that because I've had a number of people tell me they so enjoyed reading it because it sounded like the way I talk.
Nice.
So that answers the question for you on that?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just natural speak.
It was a natural thing. Now, when I first started to think about how to do this, I'd never written a book before. I mean, I've written lots of essays and things.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder, how can I organize a family like mine with all this history, all the stuff that I've got? And it just struck me the best way to do it may be do the ancestry part of it, and then start in the 20s when my parents first met. So I just thought the decades would be the ideal way to do this. So the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, 50s, 60s, right up to the year 2000 and beyond.
Correct.
And it worked tremendously well, and I was able to work within that sort of situation.
Correct. No, that's great. From the different decades that you go through in the book, is there one that really sticks out? And for any reason, it could be for a really, happy reason, or it could also be for maybe a challenging reason that changed the course of your life. Is there one that really sticks out that way?
Probably the 50s.
Okay.
Because I went to university then.
Okay.
And that's when I took naval training. I don't know how I got into that, but I got into the Canadian Navy. It was officers training, and I made my best friends that we're still friends today, which is from the 50s to 2020, which is coming up. And so those two things were big in my life. And then, of course, when that was all over in the late 50s, I didn't know what I was going to do with myself for my living. And I had two sisters that were teachers, and my older brother was a very successful teacher. He became director of education. And so I naturally, my mother was a teacher, and my grandmother was a teacher. Wow. So I naturally drifted into that. And my older brother said, why don't you just try a school to see if you like it? So late August, we started looking in the papers to see if there was a job. And there was this small school south of Bancroft, between that and Madoc. And I didn't know what I was getting myself into at that point. So I phoned them, and she said, do you have references? Well, I said, the local inspector knows me and knows my family. So Mr. Stover gave me a good report, and I got the job. And then when I drove over there on Labor Day weekend, I thought, what have I done?
Sure.
Because it's a one-room school. There were 30 kids. I had every grade. I had to know all the curriculum. I didn't even know the names of the books that they were using.
Sure.
So I wrote in the book, what I did was, I had all the kids pick their own books. So they all knew the book they were going to have. They knew the grade they were in. And that worked beautifully.
Oh, that must have been not challenging, but to have different grades in one sitting.
Yes. I don't know how I did it, honestly. Yeah. But
those were the times, right?
Yes. And the other thing is, those kids all came from sort of a farm community. So they all had similar backgrounds. And none of them had trouble with English because they were all English-speaking kids.
Sure.
So all that helped me do my job.
Did you find that what you learned in the Navy, you were able to transfer it to the education side of things, either consciously or unconsciously? Did it help in any way? Or?
Yes, bay orders.
For you or for the kids?
Both.
Did the kids know you were coming from a Navy background? Or?
No, I don't think they ever discovered that.
Sure.
The kids have discovered a lot of things about me after I was finished there. For example, I got myself a motorcycle when I was vice principal. Well, that was a cool thing to do.
Yeah.
That was the 70s. I was a vice principal.
Yeah.
And here I had a motorcycle.
Yeah.
And that was a big deal at McLaughlin Collegiate. So what else are we talking about here?
We can talk about anything. I mean,
okay.
I'm keeping this open format. So how long did you spend in the schooling system?
34 years.
34 years.
I started in 56.
Okay.
And I retired in 89.
In 89. And you went from teacher and you reached the heights of vice principal.
Well, what happened was the inspector that I had in my elementary school, which was 8 grades that I spoke about, he had his office in the high school at Bancroft. And Mr. Ragg, who was the principal there, who came from Oshawa, which is interesting, was looking for somebody who knew the elementary curriculum and has had at least 1 year experience. I had a degree from Queen's University. And my inspector said, well, I would not like to lose Mr. Hodgson, but he would be the ideal person for you because he survived a year with 8 grades. And I was going to be teaching 2 grades of what they call the terminals, which is a terrible way to call kids. But they were terminated in grade 10. That's as far as they would go.
Yeah.
We don't have it today, of course.
Sure.
So I had 2 grades. And when I went to Bancroft, I had some grade 10s, English and history. And the first day that one of the first terminal class came in, I remember it clearly because they upset 2 desks just getting into the room.
Yeah.
I thought, oh boy, another year. But they all found out that I was really interested in them. They all had learning problems and so on. And I was interested in them, and we had a really good year. And they settled down, and I think we had just a good year for them.
Sure.
And the ones who were in grade 10, they graduated then. That was their graduation year. So they all found jobs because back in those years, there was lots of jobs.
Yeah.
They could leave any school and go and get jobs. Like in my hometown, a lot of the young people who ended up in grade 8 came down here to work in General Motors and so on.
Sure.
So that's the way it was.
And that's something I find. I mean, I myself spending some time as a music educator in a past life, teaching really, even though they advertise it as a job, it really isn't a job or shouldn't be a job. It should be vocational, because when you're teaching someone, each person is different. I remember teaching group guitar lessons, to a bunch of kids, and they ranged in different levels and different ages. And it was actually the hardest thing because each one's at a different point in their learning.
That would be very difficult.
Yeah, and especially with guitar because it's not only the theory-based, it's the physical-based instrument, the aspect of, good technique and form. And to have a group class who cannot, if they're at different levels, follow you. So, so to mirror when you had those different grades, and, you gave them each their own book, it's almost like you have to personally attend to each person to do it justice, right?
Yes, yes.
Because each person might learn by, sight, they might learn by, audio, they might learn by modeling. There's different ways to learn, right?
My oldest son, Craig, teaches in Pointe Claire in Quebec. It's the English-speaking part of the island. And because he started the program from zero, he combined senior kids with junior kids in his bands. And when they were inspected and when they were competing Canada-wide and so on, the judges couldn't believe he accomplished that.
Yeah.
And that he had the sort of experience that you had, different levels of ability and so on. But he was a charming sort of guy, and they won gold medals and all kinds of things.
That's amazing.
Yeah. But so he discovered the way to do that. And I never had to worry about that other than that first year.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
What, in your opinion, what would you say makes a really good teacher from what you've learned?
Yeah, that's a good question. Basically, you have to know your subject.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can teach and learn as you go along, and often you learn a lot by teaching. You may have discovered that.
Sure, yeah, it's the catch-22.
But secondly, maybe even first, you've got to like children. You've got to like the group that you're dealing with here.
Yeah.
And I always did. I always had lots of friends. I never had any problem with friends. I went to a small high school, so I knew how that worked. And so those are definitely two things. And then you have to have the kind of a quality, or the ability to get along with other people.
Yeah.
So you have to like kids, you have to know your subject, and you have to have the ability to get along with other people.
Sure.
Because it's a people business.
It is.
And I had a wonderful principal. And interesting enough, he was principal for my brother and my sister. And he came here to Oshawa, and he was my principal here. He had a wonderful philosophy. Schools exist for students. And he got us to think of that and to deal with that. And I think that was a wonderful philosophy.
I like that. I mean, when you hear it, you think it's a no-brainer, but the more you think about that, you actually delve into what the true philosophy of school should be, right?
Yes. And he also expected that students would do what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And that's a good combination of things. Teachers who like the kids and can teach, but also, what's the second part to that? I mentioned it. Oh yeah, the students have to do their part as well.
Yeah.
So I got that from the Navy, the discipline thing. And this is kind of a joke. It's in the book. You've probably read it. We had a young English officer, and the English military, they're very strict. And he came and looked at us all, and he looked about 18, but he was probably 30. And he said, "Gentlemen, I do not want you to become a pimple on the ass of time." We didn't know whether to laugh or become hysterical. We thought that was so funny.
Yeah.
After we left there at lunchtime, we just drove ourselves crazy laughing over that. And I've remembered that every day since.
That's nice. I like that.
In other words, do something good for your life and so worthwhile.
No, for sure. And it does have a ripple effect, right? And that's the other thing I think people forget is that teachers have such a powerful effect. I mean, each person in their own experience, who can remember that one teacher that, maybe dramatically changed the course of their lives, either intentionally or unintentionally. And that's important,
I
right?
had that experience.
Everyone, I myself, and, I'm sure people.
I still remember a couple of teachers and I sort of based my own, the way I taught on them.
Yeah.
And the one guy, we called him Jimmy Johnson. His name was James Johnson, Mr. Johnson. But he used humor wonderfully.
Yeah.
Like he would say at the end of the class, okay, pick up all the bits of paper around your desk and everything. And then he would go around and say, Joyce, look at the mess under your desk. There might be just a little piece of paper like this. And the custodian would told me at the end of the year, he said, I never need to come and clean your room. It was always so tidy.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a wonderful, as I learned that from Mr. Johnson.
Yeah.
And at lunch, he'd go out and play baseball with us. That kind of thing.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Teaching almost is, it's delving a little bit into sales because you have to get the commitment and trust, as you said, from the student to put their faith in you and also their wanting to learn in you. And, if it's a subject that the student likes, that's easy. It's but if it's a subject that the student doesn't like, or, not interested, or maybe it's the first time, but they have to get through it to pass in order to, proceed to the next grade, then you sort of have to, think about it. And that sales aspect comes in, right? Getting that buy-in from the student.
Yeah, I never thought about it that way, but that's probably very true.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I retired, I had some wonderful letters, and they're in the book, about what students wrote about my teaching and so on. And one girl, I thought she was very smart. She said, your room was a place we went, and we really wanted to better ourselves for some reason.
Nice.
I gave that impression.
Yeah.
And she said, more importantly, you understood the teen-age psyche, and therefore you understood us, And they used to kid me. They say, well, you were a student too. I said, yeah, that's why I learned how to deal with you people. Of course, with humor, you can get a point across.
Sure.
But I had that. I don't know where it came from. Maybe my dad. My dad was a great kibber. I mean, he say funny things all the time.
Sure.
And I had that quality, I guess.
No, that's good. And, seeing people as they are, seeing students as they are, right? Especially at that age where they're rebelling, understanding that rebellion is happening and saying, hey, it's okay. You're going through this stage.
Yeah.
And just developing that relationship naturally.
You may have noticed that there's a page in there, and I had the nerve to do this when I was teaching in the art school in the summertime. And they all wrote what they thought about my class. And it was the loveliest things that they wrote. This one was a boy. He said, I so enjoyed your classes, but next year I'm going to take the major, which will be your class.
Yeah.
If you're going to still be here. And another girl wrote something very, very short. She said, learning art with an open mind. That was so nice.
Yeah.
Because I would never interfere with their art the way they were doing it. I would let them know what they had to do. And I just turned them loose. And there's some examples in there of masks that they made.
Yeah.
They all made that up. Each one. I didn't tell them how to do that. Of course, they were all chosen because they had ability through the whole Durham region.
Yeah.
And here I had a classroom of kids that wanted the course, that were talented, and they liked the open-minded approach. That is, I didn't tell them what to do. I maybe had to show them sometimes if there was problems, but very rarely.
Sure, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the point of art, right? It's an expression of yourself, not someone else. So
that's right.
You're giving someone the room to open up and find their own voice. That uniqueness will come out in the medium of the art that they're doing.
Yeah, I knew that if I learned that right off. If the way I reacted, because I always had my pictures put up and all that stuff, but I didn't want to teach you coming to fool with my work, because that's my work.
Yeah.
And I followed that strictly. Now, if some students said, called me over and said, there's a problem here. And I said, do you mind, I'll make a suggestion to you. He said, I would like that. But I made them do the work, not me.
Nice.
Yeah. So.
If I can ask you, so say if there's any teachers out there listening to this, and there's a particular student that they don't like, and not because of anything personal, but it's just that maybe the student's not listening in class, or being defined, there's a discipline issue, and the teacher really can see the potential in the student, and just has to enable the student to realize that potential. Any advice for something like that, or tips you could give?
Well, if you're talking about art,
Any subject,
yeah,
but you can use art as a,
or it could be anything. But we always had our pictures put up after we had a lesson. I even put a grade 7 picture of mine up. It's in the book that was up on the wall. And I would put everybody's picture up. Now I know maybe that's not a good idea, but everybody in the room loved art,
yeah.
and everybody got justification of what they did. But if I just put up the best pictures, then what do you do with the kids that don't do so well and so on? So
that's awesome. Everyone gets the equal say.
But the students knew that they were learning and changing and everything was getting better because I reinforced that stuff all the time.
Yeah.
That kind of idea.
No, I really like that because, it's one thing to complete your homework, but when you showcase your homework, that sort of generates some sort of self-esteem as well, right?
Yeah. You probably read in the book my first day in the art school in the summer, and when the bell rang, they all got up and ran out. So when the second class came, I said, this is not going to happen again.
You learned fast.
Because I had a room full of mess, and I had to clean it all up myself. And I told them, and I lowered my voice, I said, no one leaves the room until I tell them they can move the room.
Yeah.
I said, nobody jumps up and gets out of here. But there's a place for everything, and everything is in its place. It's a good little philosophy.
Nice.
I learned that from my older sister. She was a good teacher.
Yeah. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
When you went to the vice principal role, was that something that was tricky or challenging to adjust to? Only because now you're sort of leaving the front lines of educating directly, and you're getting more into the administration side of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not only you're dealing with the students, but the teachers as well, maybe. Yeah.
Well, I got a lot of positive reinforcement because the vice principal that was there before me had one of these very quiet voices.
Yeah.
And the first thing I heard all over the school was, finally we can hear the announcements because I have a loud voice. And that was reinforcement.
Yeah.
And I had all their stuff ready, their timetables and everything. They said, imagine having a timetable before school opens. And I had theirs ready, and I believed in that kind of a philosophy. And I also believed in having their papers and everything marked right away.
Yeah.
And then I said, the other side of that is you have to do your best, and you have to have your work on time as well.
So you set that tone from the start.
I had a great relationship with students.
That's great. And that preparation is key as well, right? Mm-hmm. To have it in advance.
Yeah. So as a vice principal, it's on a big scale, And the one thing, I went to Napanee High School, I mentioned this, was they had 1,800 students. I didn't know one student in the school because I didn't live there. And I had to make a timetable for the next year so that 1,800 students would have an individual timetable.
Yeah.
Now that seems impossible to do, doesn't it?
Each student has their own.
Every kid has his own timetable.
Wow.
That's the way it is now.
Yeah.
But the reason for it is this, the computer.
Computer.
So I had teachers, I had subjects and times. Basically that's it. And you put it all together. So if a kid wanted English grade 10, it would go through the computer, and I might have 50 kids in there.
Yeah.
So you can't. So I had to rearrange that timetable so that we get down to 35 or 30.
Yeah.
It was. I was surprised myself that I was able to do that because I don't play bridge or anything like that. But for some reason, I was, and also I selected 2 or 3 top-notch guys. One was a math head, one was the guidance head, and that was pretty much it. And they had good minds for this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I amazed them. I'm not a math teacher, for the math ed. He said, I don't know how you can do this. I said, well, you just learn, and I know a lot about teaching and what kids need, and so.
Yeah. You were almost like the human spreadsheet.
Something.
What would you say it takes to be a really good vice principal or principal at a school?
Well, I can use examples. And I did this when I had time. I love to be out and say hello to everybody that was coming into school. Masses of kids. And they always felt that I was a friendly person, but
Yeah.
not somebody to be afraid of.
Yeah.
They got to know me. And I'd walk around the school at lunchtime. I'd go into the cafeteria, and if somebody left a plate full of junk, I'd pick it up and pick it up. And everybody could see me do that. So that encouraged them to do what they were supposed to do.
Yeah.
Set the example is really important.
Correct.
That's really what it comes down to.
And walk yourself in the shoes that you want people to walk.
Yeah.
Right.
And, if a teacher came to me and say, I have an appointment and it's my last class, I would make arrangements for them.
Yeah.
And therefore, they would do the best they could if I did that kind of thing.
Sure. Is this something that they teach when you're training to be an educator, to be personable with people, to treat everyone equally? Because it seems to be the foundation that everyone needs to succeed in these roles. Or is this something that if you have it in your characteristic, it comes out in the field?
I don't know how to answer that, really.
They don't formalize this as...
I've had teachers tell me that when they came to teach, this was my role as a vice principal and so on, is to help them when I found they were making mistakes and so on. And I never, ever addressed a teacher down in front of other teachers or other kids or the students. I'd always one-on-one if there was a problem.
Nice.
And because that really upsets students and other teachers if that happens. It's kind of a common thing, isn't it? If you give somebody a bad time in front of other people, they're going to be very upset with that. And they're just going to be angry. They're not going to learn anything. But you take them aside and say, if you do something, for example, in that first school I was in, we had plasticine. Do you know what plasticine is?
Yes. Yeah.
And you can make little animals and all that stuff with it.
Today they call it Play-Doh.
Is that what they call it? Play-Doh. Well, that's interesting. I had a little boy by the name of Charlie, and I found out later that Charlie stole the big ball of plasticine. Luckily, I had more. And I never could accuse him of it because I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
But, and I wrote in the book, I think it was Charlie that stole it. And then finally, he got into some other trouble. He didn't bring his report card. And because he was wearing a T-shirt and it was rather suggestive. Like the picture was, and it had a big bulge down here. He was a little male.
Yeah.
And I said, Charlie, I don't want you to wear that T-shirt again. He said, why not? Cheeky little kid. And I said, because, and I used the wrong word. I said, it's dirty. You can't wear that. He took it home and said to his mother, I can't wear the shirt because it's dirty.
Yeah.
Well, she wouldn't send the report card because I said that she didn't wash shirts properly.
Because it reflects on her, yeah.
So I had to go and see her, and then she admitted to me, she said, I've got some plasticine here which belongs to you. So that was Charlie.
Yeah.
So I sat down with Charlie. I didn't talk in front of the other kids. I said, now listen, when you took that home, we couldn't use that in the school, could we? Charlie, he was bright enough to understand that. So I said, if you take something from the school, then we can't use it here, can we?
Nice.
And I think his older brother stole the pitch pipe. So the kids were raised, I guess, in that family.
Yeah.
Everything belongs to everybody.
Yeah. It's a socialist sort of view.
But I won those two kids over, yes. Yeah, they're probably voting that way today.
Yeah. How many grandchildren do you have today?
9.
9. Are you happy with the education that they're getting? I mean, I know you've retired from the schooling system, but I'm sure from your interactions with them, you can get a sense of, how they're learning, right?
Well, the oldest boy, Craig, has 5 boys, and their mother's well educated and so on. And I'm quite pleased with the way that they've all learned to do their homework. And we had the oldest boy here for a year because he needed his grade 12 in Ontario to go to university because he didn't like the SAGEP program. They wouldn't change it for him. So he lived with us. We said at the end of the year to him, Craig, this has been a kind of a tough year for you because you made friends, but basically all you've done is study. He said, I've learned to study. That is what I came for. He got high marks, and now he's getting 80s and 90s in university because he learned how to study. And that was by living in our home and so on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And anything in regards to the actual content of what they're learning?
Well,
do you think it's suitable or advanced enough or not advanced?
My wife could answer that question so much better because I only taught public school for a year. But when my youngest son moved from Montreal, his kids were French speaking, also English speaking. But the youngest boy, because he was so young, didn't adjust well, and they kept moving him on anyway. And here he was in grade 6 doing grade 3 math. He should have been doing grade 6 math. And that was really bad because the system felt that the students should be advanced because they might get depressed and all that. But I don't agree with that at all.
Yeah.
That's not my philosophy. And he's had a tough time because of that.
So how would you correct something like that?
Well, what Craig and Sarah did, the oldest son, they had 2 children, and they insisted that they repeat their year.
Yeah.
Because he said they're not ready to go on. And they did, and now they're super students. They're getting marks and everything.
Got it.
Because they got, but if they'd been moved on, they would have been like our youngest grandson, who's had a real struggle to try to keep up.
And sometimes repeating a year isn't as bad as it sounds. I mean, you get to make a whole new set of friends. Then you have, 2 social circles.
And kids do that in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way they are.
Yeah.
And if they're in a big school, some of the students may be ahead of them, but they're still friends.
Yeah.
Or they get other friends.
Sure.
That's no problem.
But to struggle with development, that's not a good thing. So you have to put them in a level that's comfortable for them. Right?
Yes.
And just right enough to be challenging as well so that they compete.
And that worked fine for Craig's 2 boys.
Yeah.
They both had this similar problem. And they weren't just ready for a move. But they had quite a struggle with the school to tell them or to ask them that they move these kids back in the same grade for a year. And that worked for them.
Wow. Teachers are so powerful. And, I try to sort of remind myself and, other people in conversations that children actually spend more time with teachers than their parents in a given day. Because you're at school for maybe 8 to 10 hours by the time parents pick you up after work. Mm-hmm. If you might have extracurricular activities, so when you come back and you're with your parents, you're maybe just home for maybe 4 or 5 hours of the evening, less if you sleep early. So teachers really have an influence on the child, right?
Yes.
As well as the peers that you associate with during the day. So I want teachers to know that you have a very powerful role. Don't just look at it as a paycheck or as a job. That you are affecting the minds and lives of the future generation.
Well, what happened to our youngest grandson, he discovered he was one of these perfectionists. If he couldn't do it perfectly, he didn't want to do it, which was kind of an interesting problem. So in order to avoid having to do that, he would cause a little trouble in the class. He would be sent to the office. This was in Quebec. And there was always candies there for them. This was the new modern way to do it, give them candies. There was some toys. So I guess he thought, well, each day, if I'm tired or bored, I'll just make a little trouble and I'll go to the office. I have candy there. I have toys. And and then one time they called his dad, my younger son, to come because he was out and he won't stay in the office. So here we had the vice principal there and the guidance teacher and somebody else. They're all running around the building with this kid trying to catch him. So when Eric was telling me all this stuff, I said, I think Justin is much smarter than the teachers because he knows how to smart them every time. They never seem to catch on to his problem.
It's like the Pavlov dog principle. Who's training who, right?
Yeah. That's good. That's true.
No, that's great. You know what? We can go on so many different tangents for this conversation. Not only have, you're accomplished as a teacher, vice principal, you spent a lot of time in the education system, in the Navy, host of other things which is in your book. So if people, do get a chance to read your book, I do encourage that because, usually the autobiography of a person is in one sort of career line or, on one vocation. But with you've spanned multiple categories, including music, art, etc. Your paintings are beautiful. We've played together on many musical occasions. Last thing, if I can just ask you, so pretend we're maybe, 10, 15, 20 years in the future, and your 9 grandkids are now listening to this recording. What are some things, maybe, 1, 2, or 3 things you would want them to know that you consider to be the truths of life that you would maybe want to pass on to them?
That's a philosophical question.
It is. The best way to end podcasts, really.
You mean the best way to live your life, that kind of thing?
Anything. Could be anything that you want them to know that you consider to be true in life. And, it brings about good things.
Well, you have to get the work ethic. I think that is one of the basic laws of life. If you get the work ethic, all the successful people I know have been great workers. And I even know friends of mine who were kind of mediocre students and so on, but they knew how to work. Yeah. And one of my friends just had his 90th birthday, and he had an enormously important life and did so many things in his community. And it's because he had the work ethic. I think that's really the basic thing to have.
Yeah.
Because that leads to everything else, I think, that you do. Your hobbies, your work, everything.
Yeah.
There's no place in our world for lazy people.
Yeah.
Unless you want to live in welfare or something.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's true, because you can have all the talent like they say you can, but if you don't have that work ethic to utilize that talent, right?
Yeah.
And bring it about.
It's wasted.
It's wasted,
isn't it?
Yeah. Anything else that you'd want them to know that you feel is important?
Be happy.
Be happy.
If you can.
Yeah, if you can.
I think happiness is very important.
Yeah.
And be kind. I think kindness is very important.
Compassionate.
And I've had students point that out to me. Some teachers are not kind, and they're afraid of them, and they didn't like them. But I've always treated them kindly or humorously.
Yeah.
And I never used sarcasm. Irony, yes. There's a difference.
Correct. Yeah.
Isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because sarcasm can have sort of an insulting effect.
Be kind. Always try to help. Be happy. Those are certainly important things. And get the work ethic.
Maybe we can, put sort of like a math formula to that, so that if you have a strong work ethic, plus you are kind, that'll equal happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
There you go. Yes.
Okay, let's end it on this. Thank you very much for this interview. I wish you all the best and many more successes to come.
Thank you.
And we look forward to maybe the second autobiography at some point.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, this has been delightful.
Thank you.
Gordon. You should be a teacher. You ask very good questions.
I used to, till the students chased me out of the classroom.
Did they? I don't believe that.
That's for another podcast. Okay, thanks again, Tom.
Good.